I'm Mayor Bill McLeod, and I want to welcome you to the village of Hoffman Estates. 11 years later, we remember. To recall the horrifying events of September 11th, 2001. We remember those who lost their lives. We remember those who worked very hard to save those lives, and in many cases lost their lives. And the implications of that day, the people serving in the military and our security forces to this day are risking their lives and dying to preserve the freedom of this great country. At this time, I'd like to ask everybody to stand for the presentation of the colors.
Right, turn. Detail. Hold. Pair to post colors. Post. Read cover. Left. Peace. Present arms. Pledge of allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ready? Two. Left. Peace. Close. Brakes. Forward. March.
Everybody can please be seated. We remember this day and will continue to remember this day because it was a seminal date in our nation's history. There are young people growing up now or in high school who really have no recollection of this or what this meant to the country or the impact that it had on the world. And there are folks here who served in the military and who served in the conflicts that followed this, like Lieutenant Colonel Duckworth, and they know very well the consequences of what happened on that fateful day. We're very pleased to once again have with us our special guest speaker, Fire Lieutenant John Schneidwin. John has graciously come every year to relive his memory, his nightmare, I suppose, would probably be more accurate, of going to New York with a caravan of his fellows, trying to rescue folks. And it's a very compelling story, and it's a story that needs to be told. Lieutenant Schneidwin?
Good evening. The end of summer brings so many things. Crisp evenings, the start of football, kids returning to school, and for me, weeks of silent reflection. I agonize over the loss, I curse the cause, and I realize one choice, one action, can change your world, and literally the entire world. I am often asked two questions when people find out I went to Ground Zero. Why did you decide to go, and how has it affected your life? I was given the opportunity to go. My parents raised their 5 children to help, volunteer, and give back. My father taught me the values of the fire service, and when one man is killed, it's one too many. September 11th had so many missing, so many dead, that going to help was an honor. I think back to the children of the deceased firemen, many the same age as mine, 9 and 7 at the time of the attack, and I wonder how much they miss their dads, how many times they reach out to call but realize he will not answer. Why we went is simple. We felt we had to go. I remember hearing the story of Captain Terry Hatton of FDNY's famed Rescue 1, who while in the lobby waiting to climb up the stairs to the Inferno, saw one of his close friends and fellow fireman Tim Brown. Terry gave him a hug and said, "I don't know if I'll see you again, brother, and I want you to know I love you." We often think of character and commitment, and here are simple men who believed in their cause. Their devotion to their job and mankind demonstrated uncommon valor and sacrifice in the face of the unthinkable. They met the challenge with grace. Their legacy is a gift to us. When I see the letters FDNY, I think of service and sacrifice. With stories like these and the images we saw on TV, we were compelled to search. But please make no mistake, any dangers we might have faced paled in comparison to those seen before we arrived. Our journey began with a phone call from my then boss, Lieutenant Rick Colomay. Rick actually asked me to work for him while he went, but I asked if they had room for 2 more men, me and Fireman Butch Adams. Rick worked out the numbers and told us we would leave at 4 a.m. I hung up the phone and called my closest confidants, my parents. My mother responded with, "I'm not sure you should go. You should talk to your father." And Dad, a retired chief from the Chicago Fire Department and my lifelong hero, said, "That's great. When do you leave?" I had a large problem, though. My children did not yet know of my decision. I asked their mother if she would bring them by the firehouse so I could tell them of my decision. Johnny, then 9, and Katie, then 7, were aware of the attacks but had no idea I had chosen to go to Ground Zero. Their reaction was heart-wrenching as they asked why I had to go and when I would be returning. They left the firehouse with a tearful goodbye. That was the start of the emotional roller coaster. At 4:30 a.m., we started our journey to Ground Zero. We had a short stop at the Chicago Fire Academy to load up on supplies, and then our ragtag caravan made its way out of the city. Our group consisted of volunteers in their own vehicles. We had vans and explorers, even a mobile home. Every vehicle included a homemade sign saying Fire Department, Destination New York City. Our trip included several police escorts through Indiana, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. As we drove, other vehicles waved at us and gave us the thumbs up. People at rest stops and gas stations encouraged us and prayed for us, and some even paid for our meals. The ride was long and the anticipation of what to expect kept increasing. The radio continued to give approximate numbers of fatalities. The numbers went up with every report, as high as 25,000 on our last report. We learned along the way that icons of the FDNY were killed in the attack. Men like Chief of the Department Gansey, or Chief Ray Downing, the nation's foremost search and rescue expert, and his protege, Captain Terry Hatton of Rescue 1, whose wife Elizabeth, an aide to Mayor Giuliani, found out she was pregnant just days after the attack. And Captain Patty Brown of Ladder 3, who reached the 45th floor before the towers collapsed. And the beloved Father Michael Judge, who was the first official death of 9/11. Father Judge died while administering last rites in the North Tower. His body was carried by police and firemen to St. Patrick's Cathedral and laid at the altar as the attacks continued. It was all so surreal. As we entered New York City, it really hit me. I saw the huge plume of smoke that consumed lower Manhattan. We made our way across the George Washington Bridge and into Manhattan. It was there that we met Paul from Spot News here in Chicago. Paul prepared us to expect a gruesome scene with body parts all over. We parked the vehicles and proceeded to the Trade Center. The remaining shell of the World Trade Center looked like the Roman Colosseum to me. As we met a chief from the FDNY, he said, "Welcome to hell." And he was right. I was unprepared for the destruction we had in front of us. The fires were still burning out of control. Twisted steel blocked the streets. A choking dust cloud was everywhere. The wreckage did not resemble a building. I remember standing in front of the rubble pile and saying it's about 80 feet high, yet each tower stood over 1,200 feet. As we searched the next 5 days, we were all over the site. We were on top of the pile searching, digging with our hands, tunneling under the buildings, manning hose lines to extinguish the fire, and we were part of the famous bucket brigade. We filled 5-gallon buckets up with pieces of concrete and twisted pieces of steel. We worked in concert with the heavy machine operators who would cut and move huge pieces of steel. It was truly amazing. The towers were cities unto themselves, filled with people, furniture, and equipment, yet we could not locate any people. Nothing resembled a desk, chair, computer, or file cabinet. Everything was pulverized into powder, concrete, and steel. I wondered where all the people were. Were they trapped in void spaces? Surely we believed that some people had survived, or at least that's what we told ourselves. Yet with each void space we found, it just led to more disappointment. No survivors. As we searched, I thought about the victims, typical people at work, yet they faced a life and death race to get out of the building. The destruction left little doubt that survival would take a miracle. As we searched, we did find personal belongings in the rubble. Hats, luggage, shoes, shirts, aprons, boots, and gloves. With each boot or glove we found, we had the gruesome task of searching inside for any remains. We found checkbooks and wallets, pictures of families and children. Papers littered the site. We also found equipment buried in the collapse. Crushed cars and fire department vehicles, doors of fire engines, hose fittings and saws used to fight the fire before the fatal collapse. This was both inspiring and emotional. Pride. We knew we were representing Chicago, our fire departments, our hometowns, and all of our fellow firefighters who, if given the opportunity, would have gladly joined us. We worked right alongside the FDNY firefighters, urban search and rescue teams, and rescue dogs. We would clear a path and the dogs would enter a hole and search with their noses. At one point during our search, we heard everyone on the pile say, "Quiet, the dogs had found something." And suddenly, to our amazement, 4 firemen were pulled from the pile. The entire site began to chant, "USA, USA." It was exhilarating. We all worked harder, filling our buckets and passing them back as quickly as possible. It seemed like we were all ants working together. Later, we learned that the men rescued had become trapped earlier in the day and were not part of the original collapse. The site was dangerous. Sharp pieces of steel and concrete made walking and working tricky. Some of the steel beams were hot from the fire still burning beneath the rubble pile. The buildings next to the site were constantly being evaluated for the possibility of collapse. At one point, there was a mass evacuation of the site as officials feared a secondary collapse. Huge panes of glass and chunks of cement began to rain down. The police evacuated us, and Lieutenant Colomé and his group were ushered onto a boat and ended up in New Jersey. Injured, but concerned about his men, he refused medical attention and convinced the boat captain to take him back to Ground Zero despite his knee injury. Our days were spent either working at the site or back at our campground. We set up a camp at the school at the corner of Greenwich and Chambers. From the second-floor library, the collapsed buildings were clearly visible. The school was first used as a triage center for the injured and later a depot center for clothing and equipment after it was determined there would be very few injured people. The school had no running water or power, and the sign on the bathroom door read, "For the love of God, please do not use this bathroom." We slept on the sidewalks and school desks between our shifts at Ground Zero. So many stories are so difficult to recall as so many things were happening simultaneously. A group of us, including Lieutenant Colomé, Butch, and myself, were sent to search under World Trade Center number 5. I will never forget being tied off to a rope and snaking underneath the twisted steel and hearing that steel creak and settle. We knew there was a possibility of being killed by the collapse, but we thought at least it would be quick. As we returned that night, we saw the refrigerator trucks being filled with some of the 19,000 body parts. It was really an unbelievable sight. Emotion. The school was a place that centered me. The first couple days we had planning meetings on the second floor auditorium. The school was hot and the doors were propped open using books. As I looked down, I saw the door was propped open using one of my kids' favorite books, Chicka Chicka Boom Boom. That was a sight that always brought me back to the reality of the ordeal. This was not just a collapsed building, twisted steel and crushed concrete. It was an American treasure with real Americans missing. The World Trade Center represented America and the people who worked there. It was their home away from home. They had children and loved ones who wanted them to come home from work. Back at our camp, we spent the time between our shifts talking about our families, our jobs, and the overall effect this would have on the job of a fireman and the possibility of war. Unsure what the final number of dead would be, we knew the firefighting family took a big hit. We talked to FDNY firemen who shared their stories of their friends who weren't supposed to be working that day but traded a day to help a buddy, or who were detailed and sent to a different firehouse and now they were missing, or the guys who came in off duty volunteering to help and they were killed, or the guys set to retire and this was their last day, or the new guy whose first fire turned out to be the World Trade Center and now they were missing. Retired fathers were searching for their missing sons. Brothers were looking for their missing brothers. The horror of the day was far-reaching. A proud ritual of the FDNY was displayed. Whenever a fireman's body was discovered, only members of his company were allowed to move him, while all others saluted the flag-draped Stokes basket. Often, it was just the fire gear that identified the body. Each of us had our moments where emotions got the best of us. With some, it came from the pictures we found. With others, it was notes from the families or the frustration of not finding survivors. Some were saddened by our loss of innocence. All of us were affected by the unbelievable amount of people still missing. Communication was a problem for us at Ground Zero. We had very little information from the outside world. As a matter of fact, the best information came from my parents and other family members. I would call daily and they would say, "Wear a mask. There's asbestos at Ground Zero." Or they have bomb threats at the bridges and at the Empire State Building. The city was so overwhelmed with work and grief that spreading the word about other dangers to everyone on the scene was a daunting task. Our families paid the price for us being gone, with constant worry about the risks we faced and the unpredictable length of our stay. Each day, my kids would painfully ask, "When are you coming home?" My parents canceled their vacation, and all family members waited anxiously by the phone. What made a lasting impact on me, aside from the site, were the volunteers. They were amazing. We could not walk outside the site without somebody saying, "How about some water? Stay hydrated. Are you thirsty? Do you need your eyes flushed?" And everyone said thank you for coming. At times, people cheered us as we walked down the street. People encouraged us. They fed us, gave us fresh clothes. They prayed for us, and we prayed for them. As the week went on, we received word that they opened up the showers at the high school. We were covered in dust, smoke, grime, and sweat. We climbed the stairs to the second-floor auditorium under the glow of temporary lighting. Volunteers handed us soap and towels and ushered us into the dark showers. The water was cold, but it felt great. Washing the grime away was cleansing in more than one way. Massage therapists volunteered to help your sore muscles. Volunteers lined the streets, handing everything from socks to drinks, even homemade cookies with little inspirational notes. A little girl gave my partner Roy her stuffed animal. They gave us what they could. They also asked us to find their loved ones. They gave us pictures and handed out flyers, told us their last known locations and which tower they were in. Sadly, we failed at the mission of bringing their family members home. The volunteers would be here day and night, the Salvation Army and the Red Cross. Local restaurants prepared food for the rescuers. Companies donated tools, buckets, generators, lights, even porta potties. Clergy members would ask, "How are you really doing?" We brushed them off with an okay, but the truth is, none of us was anywhere near okay. What we had witnessed and dug through had changed our lives. Some allowed their emotions to show. I chose to lock my emotions inside and became numb. All of us continue to fight a private war about 9/11. Lower Manhattan was isolated from the rest of the city, and people would yell for us to keep searching. I felt like Ground Zero was a holy ground. Unknown to us, many of the victims were being cremated by the raging fires beneath the rubble pile. Knowing you are literally on the graves of thousands of people is unnerving. The battle continues for many who were involved in the attack, rescue effort, and cleanup. Respiratory illness continues to increase for those involved. A report has revealed that as many as 70% of us at Ground Zero during the first few weeks have some sort of respiratory illness. Thousands of responders have been treated for respiratory problems from the inhalation exposures related to the site. Many of my colleagues suffer from Ground Zero cough. It's predicted a majority of us will have a shortened lifespan based on the exposures from the World Trade Center. Testing continues for many of us who responded thanks to a grant from the federal government. The psychological effect is unknown yet very real as those involved struggle to find peace. The sobering statistics tell of the destruction. On September 11th, we lost 2,749 lives. Of those, only 289 bodies were found intact. 19,850 body parts were recovered. The oldest victim was 80, the youngest just 2. 343 firefighters were killed. The police lost 75 officers. There were 2,337 people injured. Americans donated 36,000 units of blood, but sadly, only 258 units were needed. 1,117 families still have no remains for their loved ones. 3,000 children lost a parent. Our world lost its innocence when the beautiful September blue sky was stained with the black smoke of terrorism. The culture has changed from being naive and trusting to being suspicious. What has not changed is the humanity of Americans. We all donated what we could: money, food, clothing, sometimes just a hug. Members of the Hoffman Estates Fire Department volunteered. My brother Ron, a lieutenant with the Oak Lawn Fire Department, attended funeral services at the request of the FDNY, as they feared with so many funerals they would not be able to attend them all. As we worked late into our last night, we walked off the pile exhausted and hungry. We had not left Ground Zero from the moment we arrived, and it was time to find a restaurant and actually sit down at a table. Several of us staggered wearily down Broadway. My first time to New York City, and here I am walking down the middle of Broadway at 2 a.m. Not on the sidewalk, literally down the middle of the street. The streets were dark and all the businesses were closed. It seems that the city that never sleeps was in fact asleep. We found a small restaurant and sat at a table and debriefed. Here we discussed some of our feelings, the great feeling of loss, sadness, and anger. We talked and expressed every one of our emotions to each other. Just a few hours later, the caravan loaded back up. We signed a flag dedicated to the FDNY and slowly drove towards the George Washington Bridge. To our surprise, the streets were lined with people cheering us the entire way. They thanked us and waved American flags. It was humbling to think that in their pain, they were thanking us. I left New York with a new sense of purpose, totally drained emotionally and physically. I also left with overwhelming pride in my profession and extremely proud to be an American. So I thank you, Hoffman Estates, for not letting the victims of September 11th become a footnote in our lives.
Thank you, Lieutenant, for telling us your story once again. I know it's not an easy thing to do to relive all of this, but it is very important. Thank you. Next, I'd like to ask our Police Chief, Michael Hish, to come forward. Chief.
Thank you, Mayor. Welcome. For those of us gathered here today, as well as the rest of America, the phrase 9/11 invokes a special meaning. A memory of a moment in our history when the world as we knew it changed forever. It is fitting then that every year on September 11th, we join together to honor the memory of the more than 3,000 first responders and civilians that died on this day. Today we also need to remember that out of 9/11 came a resolve to make sure that our nation was prepared for any future disasters, whether man-made or natural. September is also National Preparedness Month. As thousands of our fellow Americans respond to and recover from the damage done by Hurricane Isaac, we are called to remember that throughout our history, emergencies and natural disasters have tested the fabric of our country. During National Preparedness Month, we renew our commitment to promoting emergency preparedness in homes, businesses, and communities nationwide, and to building an America more ready than ever before. As cities and towns across our country recover from natural disasters that have spanned historic drought to devastating wildfires and storms, we are reminded of the spirit of resilience that binds us together as one people and as one American family. This month, let us honor that spirit by standing with all those affected by recent severe weather, as well as past disasters, including 9/11, and by taking the steps we can to protect our loved ones and our communities before disaster strikes. I'm sure you all remember the devastating tornado in Joplin, Missouri, where pickup trucks became ambulances, doors served as stretchers, and a university transformed itself into a hospital. Local business contributed by using trucks to ship donations or by rushing food to those in need. Disability community leaders work side by side with emergency managers to ensure that survivors with disabilities were fully included in relief and recovery efforts. These stories reveal that we can accomplish through readiness and collaboration and underscore that in America, no problem is too hard and no challenge is too great. Each of us has an important role to play in bolstering our preparedness for disasters of all types, from cyber incidents and acts of terrorism to tornadoes and flooding. To accomplish this, we need to pursue an approach to emergency management and disaster preparedness and response that engage all levels of government, to include the private sector, nonprofits, and faith-based organizations within our community. I encourage each and every one of you to learn about the risks facing our community and find out what you can do to prepare. Individuals and families can also take action by building a disaster supply kit with food, water, and essential supplies in case of an emergency, and by developing and sharing an emergency plan with their loved ones. So on this day of remembrance, it is also fitting for each of us to look forward to see how we can become better prepared for our next 9/11. To that end, I wish to thank the mayor, our elected officials, and our village administration for supporting the village's first responders in their efforts to make Hoffman Estates a safer and more prepared community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief Hish. Now I'd like to ask Hoffman Estates firefighter Kevin Arndt to come forward. Kevin?
Thank you, Mayor. How can I follow those guys? They did a great job. Thanks for coming out on this Patriot Day. It's a day that we're going to honor the 2,977 folks that died at 9/11 Ground Zero on that September morning. And let us not forget also the 6,602 guys, men and women in our fighting forces that have fought overseas in Afghanistan and Iraq, trying to preserve our way of life in result to the counterterrorism. My name is Kevin Arndt. I've been on the fire department for 11.5 years. I was hired February, just before 9/11, or just before 9/11, February of 2001. And I remember that that day, that morning, about 7:45, I was getting ready to get off shift. It was 7:45. We switched over to 8 o'clock. And I remember greeting the other folks who are coming in on first shift, talking about what we needed to talk about, passing on information, and just kind of getting ready for our day, cleaning up a little bit, and just gathering my things. When I remember that one of the guys who was watching the news had said, "You got to get in here, you got to see this," that there was a plane that just hit a building in New York City. So as a ton of us gather around the TV to kind of take a look, all of us were thinking, how can a plane hit a big building? And we, not knowing that it was a commercial jet, we're thinking it's a small plane, just kind of unsure what was going on. So as we're all glued watching TV, 8 o'clock came around. That's when the time they started doing a roll call. That was kind of put on hold temporarily. Everyone was kind of watching the news coverage and seeing what was about to unfold, not realizing about the horror and how big of an event was just about to take place. And at 8:03 our time, that's when we happened to see a large passenger plane flying into the South Tower. At that point, our hearts just sank. We didn't know what to think. For about 2 minutes, nobody said a word. Most of us sat down and just kind of watched. At that point, not realizing, what was taking place quite yet, we were talking about it and talking about what the firemen must be going through, how they got, how many lives they might have to save. Shortly after that, about 9:30, New York time, 8:30 our time, I was on my way home, called my folks, asked them if they had been watching, and they have. And it was at 8:37 was when I heard about a third plane that hit the Pentagon. It was at that point that I realized that our country was under attack by terrorists. Being a firefighter, I was also in the Marine Corps. I've been, at the time when I got hired, I was in the Marine Corps for 11 years. I've spent 16 years in the Marine Corps. All I really wanted to do was go and help and try to figure out a way to go and do such. Being a new guy, being on probation, not really knowing the system, I knew there was a chain of command. I tried to see how I can get myself there. Talking to a few others, trying to follow the chain of command, we were told to hold tight, that officially we can't send anybody down there and wait for something formal to take place, maybe with a relief aid or whatnot. That never happened. Unfortunately, for myself, I really wanted to go. As firefighter and serving in the military, myself and many others before me and after me, we share a strong desire to serve both the country and the community and be a part of something bigger than ourselves. Today, when watching videos coming up the last couple of days, if you're watching like Nat Geo and stuff, they're showing a lot of videos of and everything that took place on 9/11, and it still haunts me today. And I'm sure many people feel the same, that just watching those videos kind of hurt inside. With all the stories of lives lost, there also comes stories of survivors and bravery and heroes. We got to keep that in our hearts and minds, that with the bad, there was some good. So please keep in mind from this day forward about the 2,977 people that lost their lives at Ground Zero. And let's not forget about our service members that are fighting the war on terrorism, and they're giving the ultimate sacrifice, all 6,602 of them. And let me leave you with this. When you go to sleep each night, remember there are many men and women serving our country and many men and women serving our community. They are serving many, so many don't have to. They provide that blanket of freedom we sleep under every night. So with that, please tell your families that you love them, because you never know which day might be their last. Thank you.
Thank you, Firefighter Arndt. I want to thank our village clerk and chair of our celebrations committee, Bev Romanoff, and her committee for putting this together. I want to thank the Hoffman Estates Fire and Police Department Honor Guard. Our special guest speaker, Lieutenant John Schneidwin. John, thank you. Our Hoffman Estates Police Chief, Mike Hish. Firefighter Kevin Arndt. Ed Frank is collecting money for the Illinois Military Relief Fund, and he has his basket, if you care to contribute. I want to thank each and every one of you for coming. It's important that we remember this day. This day will live in the memory of all of us until the day we die, as it should be. And we need to let the young people realize what a day this was in the history of our country. We'll thank in advance Reverend Alan Eaton, who always seems to know the words to say to give some comfort in a very difficult situation. Reverend Eaton.
Really, there are no words. For you guys, I want to say I'm sorry that our world changed so drastically. I know how hard it must be to think about future when you're not sure what the future is. And we've never had that in this country. For the children, let me say that I'm sad that you can't roam your community like I did as a kid. I really am. I'm sad. Because we're just not sure how safe that is anymore. And let me say that I'm saddened by the fact that we have become so diversely opinionated that we don't have room in our hearts for one another. I can remember in the Eaton household and in the little farming community I grew up in, tremendous debates over ideologies, and political stances, and economic theories and farming, without anyone being called a name, without anyone being made to feel like they're a fool, without anyone making them to feel like they aren't American because they don't believe like I believe. I would like to see that come back. But it can only come back if I can do it. And you can do it. And we make ourselves do it. So that's going to be my prayer. Heavenly Father, give me a heart that includes others. Give me a heart that is open to truly hearing somebody else's opinion, even when I think it's absolutely stupid. Give me a heart that makes me want to be a servant and not a dictator. We each pray that in our own way. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend. I really, again, want to thank everybody for coming and for all our guest speakers being here. And we'll have some light refreshments courtesy of the Celebrations Commission outside the room. Hope to see you back here next year. Thank you, John. Appreciate it.